In the quiet suburbs of Willow Creek, where manicured lawns stretched like green carpets under the watchful eyes of judgmental neighbors, life seemed idyllic until the day I decided to build a fence. It all started with a simple desire for privacy. My backyard, once a sanctuary for lazy afternoons and family barbecues, had become an unintended stage for prying eyes. The house next door, owned by a woman everyone whispered about as Karen, overlooked my property like a hawk perched on a branch. Her name wasn't Karen, but it might as well have been. Eleanor Fitzpatrick embodied every stereotype of the entitled busybody who policed the neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in floral gardening gloves. I had moved into the neighborhood. 2 years prior, a single parent with 2 energetic kids and a dog that loved to chase squirrels. The home was a fixer-upper, but it had potential, and I poured my weekends into transforming the yard into a haven. Tall shrubs weren't enough. I needed something solid. So, after meticulously checking local zoning laws, ensuring every inch complied with height restrictions and setback rules, I installed a sturdy wooden privacy fence. It stood 6 feet tall, painted a neutral gray to blend with the surroundings, blocking the direct line of sight from Karen's second-story windows. The installation crew worked efficiently, and by sunset, my backyard felt like a private oasis. Little did I know this act of self-preservation would ignite a firestorm that would consume the entire block in petty drama. The hook came swiftly, like a storm cloud rolling in without warning. The very next morning, as I sipped coffee on my patio, basking in the newfound seclusion, a sharp rap echoed from my front door. Through the peephole, I saw Karen standing there, arms crossed, her face twisted in indignation. She had spotted the fence from her kitchen window and immediately deemed it an abomination. But this was just the beginning. Her complaints would escalate, drawing in authorities and unraveling the fragile peace of our cul-de-sac. As the days unfolded, the tension built like a pressure cooker, looping back to every minor infraction she could invent, leaving me wondering how far one person's nosiness could push a simple boundary dispute. Karen wasted no time. She began with passive-aggressive notes slipped under my door, scrawled in looping cursive that dripped with sarcasm. The fence, she claimed, clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony, whatever that meant in a street lined with mismatched mailboxes and overgrown hedges. I ignored them at first, chalking it up to eccentricity. But Karen was relentless. She rallied a few sympathetic neighbors, forming an informal coalition that patrolled the block, measuring fences and totting at deviations. Whispers spread at the community mailbox cluster, rumors that my fence was an eyesore, a deliberate slight against the collective property values. I felt the eyes on me during evening walks, the subtle shifts in greetings from warm to wary. Undeterred, I double-checked my permits. Everything was in order. The fence sat precisely on my property line, confirmed by a recent survey I'd commissioned, to avoid any disputes. Yet Karen's campaign intensified. She photographed the fence from every angle, compiling a dossier of evidence that she paraded at the next HOA meeting. The Homeowners Association in Willow Creek was a toothless entity, more focused on holiday decorations than real enforcement, but Karen wielded her influence like a scepter. She argued that the fence obstructed her scenic view, a laughable claim given that her windows overlooked nothing more scenic than my compost bin and a swing set. The board, swayed by her histrionics, sent me a formal letter demanding an explanation. As suspense mounted, I pondered my options. Confrontation seemed futile. Karen thrived on conflict, turning every exchange into a battlefield. Instead, I responded politely in writing, attaching copies of my permits and survey. But that only fueled her fire. She escalated to the city hall, filing complaints with the zoning department, claiming the fence violated obscure bylaws about visual obstruction. Inspectors arrived unannounced, tape measures in hand, poking around my yard while Karen watched from her porch with a smug grin. The loop of harassment tightened. Notes turned to emails, emails to voicemails, each one more accusatory than the last. My kids noticed the tension, asking why the mean lady next door hated our fence so much. I assured them it was nothing, but inside, frustration simmered. The breaking point approached subtly at first. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange, I caught Karen measuring the fence herself, her tape snagging on the wood as she muttered under her breath. She didn't see me watching from the window, but that image seared into my mind, a symbol of her unyielding obsession. The city responded to her complaints with a notice. While the fence was legal, they encouraged neighborly resolution to maintain community harmony. Karen interpreted this as a victory, demanding, "I remove it immediately or face further action." Her final note, taped boldly to my gate, read like a declaration of war. The suspense hung heavy. Would I cave to her demands, or find a way to turn the tables? As night fell, ideas began to swirl in my mind, looping back to the core of the conflict: privacy versus intrusion. Little did Karen know her victory was illusory, and the real drama was just beginning to unfold. But as the demands piled up, a seed of revenge took root, promising a twist that would leave her regretting every complaint. The neighborhood held its breath, unaware of the storm brewing behind that ugly fence. The demands from Karen echoed through the neighborhood like a persistent echo, refusing to fade. What started as a minor grievance had ballooned into a full-scale property feud, with my fence at the epicenter. I had hoped reason would prevail, but Karen's loop of complaints circled endlessly, each one tighter than the last, pulling in more allies and authorities. The hook of her initial outrage had snagged the entire community, turning casual chats into whispered alliances. Suspense built as I weighed compliance against defiance, knowing that giving in might invite further encroachments on my peace. In the weeks following her ultimatum, Karen amplified her efforts. She canvassed door to door, petition in hand, collecting signatures from neighbors who barely knew the details but nodded along to avoid her wrath. The petition painted my fence as a blight on the block's charm, a barrier that symbolized division rather than unity. I watched from afar as she charmed the elderly couple across the street with tales of plummeting property values and disrupted views. Even the HOA, previously ambivalent, bowed to the pressure, scheduling a special hearing where Karen presented her case like a seasoned prosecutor. Slideshows of before and after photos, my yard pre-fence looking open and inviting, post-fence, shrouded in secrecy, drew murmurs of agreement. I attended the hearing, armed with facts. My survey maps showed the fence squarely on my land, and zoning experts I consulted confirmed its legality. Yet the room's atmosphere was thick with bias. Karen's narrative had woven a spell, portraying me as the unreasonable newcomer disrupting the status quo. The board issued a non-binding resolution urging removal, citing community standards. It wasn't enforceable, but the psychological weight was immense. Calls from city officials followed. Gentle nudges toward mediation. Karen, sensing weakness, upped the ante with daily inspections, binoculars in hand from her upstairs window, documenting every perceived flaw in the fence's upkeep. The loop tightened further when she involved animal control, claiming my dog's barks echoed louder off the fence, disturbing her peace. Inspectors came and went, finding no violations, but the intrusions grated. My kids grew anxious, peeking out windows before playing outside. Frustration mounted, a simmering pot threatening to boil over. I considered legal action, a cease and desist, for harassment. But attorneys advised patience. Such battles drained resources and rarely yielded satisfaction. Instead, the idea of malicious compliance germinated, a subtle revenge that would adhere to rules while exposing her hypocrisy. As suspense deepened, I began researching alternatives. If the fence had to go, what could replace it without sacrificing privacy? Landscaping catalogs offered ideas, tall hedges perhaps, or decorative screens. but those felt temporary, vulnerable to her next whim. Then inspiration struck during a late-night scroll through online forums dedicated to neighbor disputes. Stories of spite fences and creative retaliations filled the pages, each one a testament to human ingenuity in the face of pettiness. Floodlights emerged as a recurring theme, bright, unrelenting beams that turned nights into days for nosy intruders. I decided to comply, but on my terms. The fence removal crew arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, their saws buzzing like angry bees. Neighbors gathered, phones out, capturing the spectacle. Karen stood triumphant on her lawn, arms folded, a victorious smirk etched on her face. As planks fell one by one, my backyard opened up once more, exposed to her gaze. The kids watched, solemnly, mourning their lost hideaway. But inwardly, I plotted. The compliance was merely the setup. The punchline would come under cover of darkness. With the fence gone, the yard felt naked, vulnerable. Karen wasted no time gloating, sending a thank-you note laced with condescension, praising my return to reason. Yet the loop of her interference showed no signs of breaking. She began commenting on my landscaping, suggesting improvements via neighborhood emails. Suspense hung in the air as I ordered the floodlights, industrial-grade, motion-activated beasts capable of illuminating a football field. Installation plans took shape, positioned strategically to shine directly into her windows. The delivery arrived discreetly, boxes stacked in the garage, awaiting the perfect moment. Nights grew tense. Without the fence, every rustle in the bushes felt amplified, every glance from her house invasive. I imagined her peering out, satisfied with her conquest. But the revenge loop was closing. Soon her demands would backfire spectacularly. As the first light fixture went up under the guise of security enhancements, the neighborhood stirred unknowingly toward chaos. The call to action loomed. Would I unleash the lights and watch her world illuminate in regret? The stage was set, but the drama demanded patience, building toward an inevitable clash. The removal of the fence marked a turning point, stripping away not just wood, but the illusion of harmony in Willow Creek. Karen's victory loop spun triumphantly, her complaints now evolving into smug oversight of my every move. The hook of her initial demand had reeled in the community, but suspense simmered beneath the surface as I prepared a counterstrike that would blind her to her arrogance. With the backyard exposed, privacy became a distant memory, fueling my resolve to reclaim it through cunning rather than confrontation. In the aftermath, Karen's intrusions multiplied. She strolled the property line daily, clipboard in hand, noting suggestions for my yard's upkeep. Weeds that weren't there before suddenly appeared in her reports to the HOA, each one a fabricated slight. The kids adapted by playing indoors more, their laughter muffled behind closed doors. I felt the weight of constant surveillance, her upstairs, lights flickering like accusatory eyes late into the night. Forums online became my refuge, tales of similar feuds offering blueprints for revenge. One story in particular resonated. A homeowner who, after losing a fence battle, installed lights that turned a neighbor's home into a perpetual daylight zone. Procurement was straightforward. I sourced the floodlights from a commercial supplier, opting for high-lumen models with adjustable beams and timers. They arrived in unmarked vans, assembled in the garage away from prying eyes. Positioning was key, mounted on tall poles along the former fence line, angled precisely toward Karen's bedroom and living room windows. I consulted electricians for safe installation, ensuring compliance with all codes to preempt any counter-complaints. The work began under the cover of evening, wires buried discreetly, fixtures camouflaged with neutral paint to blend until activation. As the setup progressed, suspense built like storm clouds gathering. Neighbors noticed the poles but dismissed them as garden accents. Karen, ever vigilant, approached one afternoon, inquiring about the unsightly metal rods. I brushed it off, as enhanced lighting for safety, a nod to recent break-ins in adjacent suburbs. She nodded suspiciously but retreated, her loop of meddling momentarily disrupted. Inside, I tested the system covertly, the beams slicing through the dark like lasers, illuminating her siding in brilliant white. Satisfaction coursed through me. This was revenge wrapped in legality. The loop tightened as I layered defenses. Motion sensors ensured the lights activated at the slightest provocation. A cat wandering by, leaves rustling in the wind. Timers added persistence, scheduling bursts at odd hours. I documented everything, receipts, permits, even photos of the setup to prove intent was security, not malice. Online communities cheered my plan virtually, sharing tips on amplification. One suggested adding reflectors for maximum glare, another warned of potential backlash. But the hook was set. Karen's regret was inevitable. Installation completed on a moonless night, the poles standing sentinel like silent guardians. The first test run was exhilarating, the yard bathed in light, shadows banished. Karen's house glowed unnaturally, windows reflecting the assault. She didn't notice immediately, but dawn would bring realization. In the interim, I pondered the fallout. Complaints to authorities, perhaps even retaliation. Yet the suspense thrilled me. This was the pivot from victim to victor. Days blended into anticipation. Karen continued her patrols, oblivious to the trap. The kids, sensing change, asked about the magic lights, their innocence a stark contrast to the brewing pettiness. I explained them as protectors, shielding us from the dark, both literal and metaphorical. The neighborhood buzzed with unrelated gossip, unaware of the impending spectacle. As the switch awaited flipping, the loop of drama circled back, promising escalation. The call to action whispered in my mind, activate and observe, turning her, demands into her downfall. But timing was crucial. One premature beam could unravel the plan. With the floodlights poised like coiled snakes, the neighborhood's fragile calm teetered on the edge of disruption. Karen's loop of victory parades continued, her gloating notes now praising the improved openness of my yard. The hook of her overreach had ensnared me once, but suspense crackled in the air as I prepared to unleash a blinding rebuttal, transforming her triumph into torment. Activation came on a Friday evening, the weekend promising ample time for observation. As dusk settled, a programmed timer engaged the first light, its beam piercing the twilight straight into Karen's dining room. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The glow flooded her space, casting harsh shadows that danced like unwelcome guests. From my window, I watched her silhouette pause, then scramble to draw the curtains. But the intensity overwhelmed the thin fabric. Light seeped through, turning her home into a lantern. The loop escalated overnight. Motion sensors triggered sporadically, bathing her facade in brilliance at random intervals. A passing raccoon set off a cascade at midnight, followed by wind-swayed branches at 2 a.m. Each burst lasted minutes, long enough to disrupt sleep, but short enough to evade easy blame. By morning, dark circles under her eyes betrayed exhaustion. As she emerged for her routine inspection, she eyed the poles suspiciously, connecting dots slowly. A note appeared on my door by noon. Inquiries about the light's purpose, laced with veiled threats of complaint. Undeterred, I amplified the system. Additional fixtures joined the array, their beams converging like spotlights on a stage. Timers, synchronized for peak annoyance, dawn awakenings, and evening interruptions. The yard remained secure, but Karen's sanctuary crumbled. Neighbors murmured about the weird glow emanating from her side, some chuckling at the irony. She confronted a few, blaming me indirectly, but denials held firm. The lights were on my property, serving a legitimate purpose. Suspense mounted. as her reactions intensified. She installed thicker blinds, but the glare persisted, reflecting off walls and ceilings. Sleepless nights led to erratic behavior, forgotten trash bins, unkempt garden beds. The HOA received her pleas, but inspections found no violations. My setup complied with brightness limits for residential security. City officials echoed the sentiment, dismissing her as overreactive. The loop of her complaints boomeranged, each one highlighting her pettiness. Online, I shared anonymized updates on dispute forums, garnering virtual applause. Suggestions poured in: add colors for variety, or sync with music for absurdity. I resisted excess, focusing on sustained pressure. The kids adapted, viewing the lights as a game, counting activations like fireworks. But beneath the levity, tension brewed. Karen's breaking point neared. As weeks passed, her loop frayed. Attempts to block the beams with tarps failed comically, wind scattering them across lawns. Retaliatory spotlights from her side proved futile, their weaker beams lost in mine. The neighborhood divided. Some sided with her out of habit, others relished the reversal. Suspense peaked during a community picnic, where her haggard appearance sparked whispers. The call to action burned brighter, persist until regret consumed her, forcing acknowledgement of her folly. Yet a twist loomed. As authorities circled back with unexpected scrutiny, the floodlights' relentless assault had turned Karen's home into a beacon of regret, her once dominant loop unraveling thread by thread. The hook of her fence demand now seemed a distant folly, but suspense lingered as backlash brewed, threatening to engulf us both in official entanglements. Karen's countermeasures faltered one by one. Professional installers she hired for blackout curtains couldn't fully extinguish the intrusion. Light found cracks, infiltrating dreams. Her complaints flooded city channels, noise from the hum of fixtures, though they were silent. Health hazards from disrupted sleep, unsubstantiated. Inspectors returned, meters in hand, confirming compliance. Each visit bolstered my position, their reports noting the light's legality and her history of frivolous filings. The loop twisted when she escalated to legal threats. A cease and desist letter arrived via certified mail, accusing me of harassment and intentional infliction of distress. I consulted an attorney who laughed at the irony. Her actions mirrored the very claims. Countersuits loomed as an option, but I opted for defense, providing documentation that painted her as the instigator. The neighborhood watched, popcorn in hand, as the drama spilled into public forums. Anonymous posts on local social media detailed the saga, garnering likes and shares that amplified the spectacle. Suspense heightened during a mediated meeting arranged by the HOA. Karen arrived disheveled, eyes bloodshot, pleading her case with trembling hands. The board, weary of her antics, urged compromise. I offered a truce. Dim the lights if she ceased. Interference. She refused, demanding total removal, sealing her fate. Post-meeting, the beams intensified, timers extended for emphasis. Backlash arrived via authorities. Police visits for disturbance calls found nothing amiss, officers chuckling at the setup. Fines for false reports began accumulating on her end, a poetic justice. The loop closed tighter, her isolation growing as allies distanced themselves, tired of the endless cycle. As regret manifested, Karen's routines crumbled, missed work, neglected chores. Whispers suggested moving, but pride anchored her. The climax approached, the suspense electric. The call to action echoed, push until surrender, ensuring her demands echoed back as echoes of defeat. But resolution beckoned, promising closure. Karen's empire of complaints had crumbled under the weight of her own making, the loop of pettiness finally snapping. The hook that began with offense now ended in illumination, suspense resolving into a satisfying denouement where regret reigned supreme. Authorities' final intervention came swiftly. Accumulated false reports triggered a formal warning from the city, threatening penalties if her harassment continued. Coupled with HOA sanctions for abusing resources, Karen faced isolation. Neighbors, once swayed, now avoided her, sharing stories of her overreach. My lights persisted, a constant reminder, until a white flag appeared, a note begging for mercy. Compliance followed. She withdrew all complaints, even offering to fund partial fence reinstallation. I declined, opting for peace over restitution. The lights dimmed gradually, privacy restored through mutual deterrence. Karen's regret was palpable. Sleepless nights had humbled her, turning the nosy neighbor into a recluse. The neighborhood healed, lessons learned in boundaries and backlash. My yard flourished, kids playing freely once more. The saga became local lore, a cautionary tale of demands gone awry. In reflecting on this wild ride, one can't help but urge others facing similar tyrants. Stand firm, get creative, and share your stories. Like, subscribe, and comment below if you've battled. Karen, your experiences keep the community strong.